And joining us on the broadcast this minute is our correspondent Olly Barratt from London. Olly, a range of issues that have been discussed as a part of that debate. I have to ask you, this entire election, the campaign has somewhat been focused on Brexit, but there are so many other issues on the voters' minds that will be governing the outcome. I have to ask you for your assessment of what those major issues are. And also, it's very interesting to see how the opinion polls so far seem to have painted a rosy picture for Boris Johnson. What is the mood like on the ground just 5 days to go before the election?
Well, in terms of the major issues, there are lots of them. One of them is Britain's National Health Service. Now, there are ways that relates back to Brexit, and almost everything, as you suggest, relates back to Brexit in this election. But healthcare is crucial to the campaign and has been mentioned frequently by both sides, and they've levelled attacks on each other on that issue as well, but also issues around education, crime, levels of public spending. Certainly we've been in a period of austerity in the United Kingdom, and both sides, both major parties, Labour and the governing Conservatives, are insisting that effectively the age of austerity is now over and that Britain's public services do need an era of investment now. So there are all sorts of major battleground areas that are being discussed, as well as that Brexit issue. In terms of the polling, it is certainly the case that the polls have narrowed somewhat, so that the Conservatives of Boris Johnson are not as far ahead as they were of the opposition Labour Party led by Jeremy Corbyn, but they are still some distance ahead. Most polls have the Conservatives 8 or 9 or 10 points ahead of Labour at this stage. Now, given that polls aren't always accurate, and given that Britain has a constituency system which isn't reflective of national polling, it's still therefore very hard to predict who is going to win come Thursday and the results when they start to trickle in on Friday. If the polling is accurate, then you would expect that Boris Johnson is likely to win a majority of some sort in the House of Commons. But a swing in either direction, even if it is very small, given the way that the election works in the UK on a constituency by constituency basis, could make a huge difference to the makeup of the House of Commons going into next year. One thing is almost certain at this stage, which is that Jeremy Corbyn's opposition Labour Party, unless some kind of miracle occurs in the next few days, cannot win a parliamentary majority themselves. The best Jeremy Corbyn can hope for at this point is that he is able to get close enough to the Conservatives, perhaps pip them in the sense that he can scrabble together some kind of coalition, which would mean that he was able to form a government. But Jeremy Corbyn, as I say, unless something huge changes in the next few days, is not going to be the outright winner next week.
Right, and the last thing that the people of the UK now want at this stage is more uncertainty. They've had enough of that, certainly, for the last 3 years. Stay with me, Olly. Just a closer look at the demographic as far as this election is concerned. 46 million people eligible to vote in this election. The number includes hundreds and thousands of those who were too young to participate in the Brexit referendum in 2016. Young voters who had no say in the country's decision to leave the European Union might hold the key to the results. But the question is, do they care? And that is a question that's been asked by many experts on the ground as well. It is a known fact that young people in the UK do not turn up to vote in large numbers. Their contribution in deciding the country's political future is far less than old voters. Let's take a closer look at the numbers now. In 2017 elections, just over half of those aged under 35 voted. More than 70% of those aged above 60 voted the same year. 3.85 million people registered to vote between 29th October to 26th November. Only two-thirds of those who made new registrations were under 35 years of age. But the surge in number of young voters might prove to be good for the Labour Party. The party has been trying to defy all odds and will win the general elections, and has been winning the general elections since 2005. This year, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson's major electoral promise is to get Brexit done. What do the young people think of Brexit? The major concern here is misplaced priorities, while youth in the UK struggle with basic necessities like affordable housing. Labour and Conservatives continue to focus on Brexit. Brexit will also impact the education system. British youth might find it difficult to study in Europe. Higher education might become more expensive. Multiculturalism is also an issue that the youth is extremely sensitive about, and Brexit would lead to fewer opportunities for the youth to live in a multicultural environment. It would make it more difficult for the migrants to settle in. And these are few but important reasons why the youth in the UK might oppose Brexit. Analysts are forecasting an electoral youth cake. That being said, it is difficult to gauge how many voters will be motivated by Brexit and how many by domestic issues. Apart from Brexit, we will have to wait and watch. Olly, it's very interesting to also see how 3 years ago, it was a very borderline verdict that had emerged as far as Brexit is concerned. And many have said, including Jeremy Corbyn, that there might be a need for a second referendum. It's a valid point to be discussed, given the fact that many on the ground who will be voting in this election as well, perhaps would be more aware of the consequences of the UK leaving the EU. And it's also very important to look at what the youth have to say and whether or not they will express their viewpoint by voting at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that is necessary to point out at this stage is that Brexiteers would say that there are opportunities created by Brexit, that it's not just about negatives for young people. They would say that there are positives to come out of leaving the European Union as well. That said, we do know that the majority of younger voters in this country were against Britain leaving the European Union and are considered more likely to vote for Labour or the Liberal Democrats this time around. As a result, the key question will be partly how many of them bother to turn out to the polls, because in 2016, as you quite rightly point out, young people did not turn out to vote in favour of Remain in as large numbers as had been expected, and that was potentially crucial in the way that the result came out. So this time it'll be very interesting to see how many young people do head out to vote. The other problem that the Labour Party has on the other side of that coin is that they are losing quite a lot of support in constituencies that voted for Britain to leave the European Union among older voters who have traditionally always voted for the Labour Party. Many of those are now saying, look, we're going to have to vote for the Conservatives this time around, partly so that we can get Brexit done and partly because we're not deeply enamoured with the current leadership of the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn. So yes, it may well be that more young voters head towards Labour and give them a boost this time around, but at the same time some of those older Labour voters, particularly in seats in the north of England, appear, many of them, to be heading over to the Conservatives this time around. There's a potentially radical and also perhaps long-lasting realignment of British politics going on that we may well see unfold in this election on Thursday.